Welcome to Beyond Disruption, where you'll learn how emerging tech is changing the world of accounting, business, and finance. Our guest experts break down the latest news in everything from blockchain to robotics, artificial intelligence to human intelligence. Tune in to find out how you can stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. From our London office, I'm Kyle Hannon. In this episode, Wellbeing in the Workplace, we'll be talking about how we can strike a better balance between the 9 to 5 and what makes us thrive. We'll be exploring how to bring more headspace into the workplace, and we'll be doing that with our expert guest, Lauren Gasser. Lauren is a former AICPA and CIMA staff member who's changed tack and started a career as a yoga instructor, a mindfulness coach, and a wellbeing podcaster. She makes a fortnightly show called Move Your Head, and she'll talk us through her own deeply honest and personal journey and reveal some practical things that a business can do to prioritize well-being and enable it in the workplace. So let's get started. Hello, Lauren.
Hello.
Where are you speaking to us from today?
I am in South London, Brixton today.
Good. Well, it's a nice sunny day there. So appreciate you taking a break from the sunshine to join us here in the podcast. We certainly look forward to sharing your experience on well-being and your insights on how to bring that into the workplace and share that with our community of listeners in more than 120 countries. Some of them may already be aware of your work, but for everyone else, what have we left out? What else are you working on, and how does it connect with our topic today, which is well-being in the workplace?
I started teaching yoga because I discovered it when I was at university. I found it helped an awful lot with my stress and with my own anxiety that I experienced through most of my teenage years. And I discovered yoga and meditation, mindfulness, and without wanting to make it sound too dramatic, it pretty much changed my life. It changed the way that I approached things, especially the way that I managed my own mental health. And I wanted to become a yoga teacher and to help other people to use yoga and meditation in a way that I had, in a way that helped them to manage their own well-being and their own mental health. And I hadn't ever intended specifically to go into well-being in the workplace. That happened quite organically. I started teaching actually while I was working for the association in their London office. And then I got another class in another office, and it kind of snowballed until I was specializing, I suppose, in yoga and mindfulness for professionals in a corporate environment.
Discovery is always an amazing thing. Tell us a little bit more about that first session and what it meant to you.
At university, I had always had, shall we say, questionable mental health. I had experienced quite bad anxiety and bouts of depression for most of my adolescence, and university was a very, very difficult time for me. It's difficult for everyone, like lots of stress, lots of pressure. I wasn't coping very well, and a friend of mine recommended that I come with her to a yoga class because she thought that it might do me some good. It might help me to relax a little bit. And actually, the first class that I ever attended, I remember very clearly, I left halfway through, and not because I didn't like it, but because I actually found it quite overwhelming. Anyone who's practiced a yoga or mindfulness, it's quite a big deal to sit quietly with your own thoughts, especially when those thoughts aren't particularly pleasant. So I left early and I thought, oh God, that was horrible and scary. And then the next day, I don't know exactly why. I felt like I needed to go back straight away. It tapped into something that was quite difficult, but also I knew straight away how powerful and necessary it was. So I went back the next day to another class, and it was still scary, but it was a bit less scary than the first time. And within about a week or two, I was just completely hooked. I found that mindfulness and meditation, especially, the way that I often describe it to people that come to my classes is that it's basically practicing choosing what you give your energy to. It so often feels like we are our thoughts. And if we have a thought or a feeling, we have absolutely no control over it. Personally, one negative thought can derail me for days. It'll just go round and round and round in my head. And mindfulness is really just the practice of choosing whether or not you give a thought your energy. And that makes it sound much easier than it is. And obviously there are some times where you just can't get a thought or a feeling out of your head. But often it is possible to observe a thought, to realize that you're having a thought that isn't really serving you in any way. It's not benefiting you in any way. And to just choose to give your energy to something else. And that becomes easier and easier the more that you practice meditation, or at least it has for me. And even years and years after starting, it's not like I'm just happy and carefree all day every day. It's not magic, but I think that it gives you tools to at least just have a sense of control over your own mind and over the way that you live your life. Is something that I was looking for a very long time, and that I found in mindfulness and in yoga in a way that I didn't find in anything else.
Thanks so much. For many people, I think they would find that particularly difficult to admit to themselves, let alone share with other people. But these discussions about mental health, about resilience, is something we're hearing more and more, especially when here in the UK we're reading stories about young people going to university, and with the pressure on online, social media, what that's adding to what they have to try and just get their head around. Starting university, the disruption of, for many people, living away from home for the first time, living in an entirely new environment, and at the same time having to figure out how to create a path towards their future professional career. So this isn't really anything new. If you cast your mind back a bit, where were some of the first examples you saw of mental health, workplace well-being starting to come to the fore? Where did you see this start to manifest itself in the organizations that you were working for? And what did they do about it? How did they change what they were doing?
I think that that's just to go back on a point that you just made. I think that this sense that mental illness is new in some way is nonsense. I mean, we've always experienced human emotion in its varying degrees. The fact that it's now something that we're able to talk about and identify is, I think, only a positive thing. I think that the main change that I have seen is the fact that the more that we talk about mental health in the media, on television, lots of fantastic campaigns, especially in the last year or two, with people openly talking about their own experiences, the more that we start to talk about it in the workplace. And so employers and organizations have to be prepared for that. I think that it's quite easy to have a values or a mission statement or something that says that you really value your staff and well-being is really important, all that kind of thing. But it's sort of empty words unless your actions, unless your policy, the actual working environment in which people are, allows people to feel safe to talk about their own well-being and allows them to take care of themselves.
So these issues have certainly been around for years, and the vocabulary, the ways we're talking about it, are these days much easier to share on social media. Information is online. We're surrounded by data and discussions about pretty much any topic under the sun. But where did you discover this for the first time? What was the first experience you had of hearing words like mental health, workplace well-being? When did you first hear these formally raised in a workplace environment?
Well, I have mostly worked in the charity sector, and I think that at least the charities that I have worked for have often been very good at managing these sorts of conversations, partly because when you work for a charity, you're often, as a member of staff, you're often dealing with quite emotional and sometimes even traumatic content and subject matter. So it's very, very important that staff feel as though they're safe to say if they're feeling overwhelmed, or if they're finding something very difficult, or maybe, they need to go home for the rest of the day and just kind of take stock, whatever that might be. So I would say that I first became aware of it working at charities. It was really built into the working week. For example, one of the charities that I worked at, there would be one lunchtime a week where there'd be kind of like a brown bag lunch where you could go and sit together and eat, and that somebody would say, so, what has anyone sort of seen or heard anything really upsetting this week that they'd like to talk about? And that was really, really helpful. I think that it has to be something that comes from the top down. So you have to be able to feel, in order for an employee, for a member of staff to feel comfortable talking about the fact that they're feeling overwhelmed or finding things difficult. I think that it's important that people in leadership set that example. So at this charity that I'm describing now, our CEO was very, very open and honest about sometimes becoming very upset by things that she'd heard. She was very emotionally intelligent. She wasn't afraid to appear to be upset in front of us, in front of members of staff, or to talk about how hard she found something. It's not about undermining your professionalism or making it seem as though you're incapable or weak in any way. That it never came across that way. It was just that she wanted to be very honest with us, and it meant that we in turn were able to be honest with her, which I think benefited everyone.
You have to balance honesty, transparency, and confidentiality. That's the way to create conversations that lead to transformation in the workplace. You can't talk about something like this without it feeling that perhaps you're putting something out there which can make people feel a little bit vulnerable. So the first thing is to get used to having those conversations and just to be honest. And that's bottom up as well as top down. Right, before we continue, a quick note that this podcast is part of the Go Beyond Disruption initiative by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You'll find out about us on the website. We'll have links in the show notes, and that's where you'll also find links to the AICPA store and the CGMA store. Those websites have courses, webinars, and more professional development resources around this topic. And to get our latest podcast episodes every week, that's automatic and completely free. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and plenty of other places where you get your podcasts too. You can search for us online, Go Beyond Disruption Podcast. Simple. Speaking of places, let's get back to where we were in our conversation with mental health and workplace well-being expert, podcaster, and yoga instructor, Lauren Gasser. So, Lauren, let's ask about having the conversations. We know what people need to talk about, but how easy is it for them to actually do it in a workplace environment when you've got senior management, when you've got members of professions, which may be less touchy-feely than many others? I mean, you're not looking at musicians or creatives. You're looking at people who may be bankers or accountants. This is not a conversation which may at first come naturally to that type of professional. It may feel uncomfortable. It may feel unfamiliar. So what are some practical steps that would help people lift their heads from the spreadsheets and start to have conversations like this?
Well, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. I think that there are several things to consider. Firstly, it's important to say that well-being doesn't have to mean practicing yoga in your office. Like, there are just people who are not ever going to feel comfortable practicing yoga in front of colleagues. And I completely understand that. Well-being doesn't look the same for everyone. It might be that some people just need some time alone. Some people might need to have the flexibility to take a slightly longer lunch break, or to leave a bit early one day because they're having a really bad time of it. But I do think that it's important for people to step out of their comfort zone sometimes, And I think that just because the image that you have built is one of professionalism and perhaps even formality, you're someone who's in a senior position, and like you said, you wear the suit and you keep your distance. You make sure that you're always seen in a very professional capacity. It's not necessarily a bad thing to break down some of those walls with your employees. So, for example, at the moment, I am teaching yoga and meditation classes for the Law Society. And obviously there are lots of the sorts of people that you're describing. And one of their senior directors, he started to come to the yoga and the meditation class. And whether he did this intentionally or otherwise, he has become an ambassador of sorts. He talks about the classes. Yeah, he talks about them with within the senior leadership team. He mentions them when he gives updates and things like that. And I think that has been really powerful, because it's meant that other people who maybe identify themselves with him, people that think that they're that kind of person, in that that they're senior and that they're not the kind of person who does yoga in inverted commas, actually thinks, oh well, maybe I will give that a go if that person's doing it. So I try, whenever I start a new class somewhere, to find the least likely advocate that I can, the least likely person that you would imagine doing yoga. And I think that often it feels like it opens the door to other people who would normally think that this isn't really for me.
So it's really important to find an advocate. And if you can get someone who understands the importance of this and then will motivate this as something that their organization does and drive it from the top down, that's ideal. But sometimes you've got to start from the bottom up. So what are some of the ways that you can introduce this from an individual level? Just you, a couple of workmates, doing something like this. What are the first practical steps you can take? Start with an individual.
Well, I think that the simplest solutions, the simplest answers to that, are ones that people probably know already. Things like actually taking breaks, taking 5 minutes every hour or two to step away from your desk, to have you can have a stretch at your desk in a very unassuming way. It doesn't have to be like downward facing dog in the middle of the office. Taking a lunch break, getting outside, going for a walk. These are all things I can almost feel people listening rolling their eyes, like, oh, if only I could have a lunch break. But that's kind of where the policy and the company's ethos comes in. Because if you work somewhere and you honestly feel like you cannot ever take a lunch break because you have too much to do, then that is something that you should be able to raise with your line manager, because that isn't for one thing, it's not productive, and for two, at some point that is going to start to impact your well-being, and then you won't be producing the best work that you could anyway. So actually having time away from your desk, walking, drinking lots of water, stretching. One of the best things about mindfulness and meditation is that just doing it for 5 minutes makes a massive difference. So there are lots of like apps and YouTube channels and websites and things that offer guided meditation, either for free or, for like a really cheap subscription. So taking 5 or 10 minutes out of your day to just sit quietly on your own and do a mindfulness practice and then get back to your desk. That's a really brilliant habit to get into. And this isn't just about staff feeling better and happier, which obviously is hugely important, but from a business perspective, this makes sense. I mean, there is so much research now that's gone into levels of productivity, levels of creativity, just how much better you are at everything you do if you allow yourself some time and some space to completely switch off, to recharge, to literally to just get things flowing again. Some organizations are much better at promoting this kind of thing than others. It isn't just about trying to avoid stress. It's actually about improving the output of your staff too.
So change practices, do things differently. Start saying yes to different stuff, but you have to balance things out, haven't you? For everything you say yes to, there has to be something that it gives you the opportunity to take out of what you do, to say no to. Mm-hmm. One of the things you've been saying yes to is your new podcast called Move Your Head. How did that start? Tell us more about the podcast.
Move Your Head is a fortnightly podcast where I have a different guest each episode, and they talk to me about their experience with mental health, mental illness, how it manifested for them, because you soon discover when you start talking about this that it looks completely different for everyone. And then I talk specifically about ways that movement in any capacity helps those people, or has helped those people, to cope with their mental illness. So I have people, obviously, yoga and Pilates and stretching and things comes up quite often, because that's kind of where I go, what the things that I do to help myself. But I've had people come and talk about walking and talk about boxing, cycling, swimming, martial arts, all kinds of stuff, which is one of the reasons why I just talked about walking on your lunch break, because it is such a common thread in the guests that I have, that just moving, I think that's kind of the takeaway, just moving in any capacity, move your body, take some deep breaths, get away from your desk, get away from a screen, even just for 5 or 10 minutes. And it really just makes such an enormous difference. And if you make that into a habit, if it's a habitual thing, then I think that often people notice a really big difference.
Making a podcast brings all sorts of new routines, workflows and processes, and you've got to be fairly disciplined to make podcasts on schedule every time. Believe me, we know all about that here at the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. How have you found these new workflows, these new processes, these new routines, adding these new tasks to your working month? How's that help refine and define what you do?
One of the reasons that I became a yoga teacher and that I became interested in all of this stuff is because I struggled with my own mental health for a long time, and I found talking about it very therapeutic. For a very, very long time, I never talked about it. I certainly didn't talk about it in any kind of professional capacity or any professional environment, because I, like a lot of people, thought that was going to be detrimental to my career in some way. If my boss found out that I got anxiety or depression, and they were going to think that I was a liability, maybe I wouldn't get opportunities that I would have if I hadn't said anything. And then I finally just thought, oh, I can't go on like this. I have to just be honest. And I found it hugely beneficial. It helped me massively. And I hope that it helps the people that I talk to about it. And now I try to, it's really difficult, but I do try to be more honest in my various jobs too. If I am having a really bad few days, I feel like I should be able to tell my employer that is what's happening. And it doesn't mean that that's me forever. It just means that I want to be honest with them that I'm having a bad few days, and that I maybe need, it's very, very simple things like that. I might need to work from home for a day or two, or I might need to take a slightly longer lunch break, or leave slightly earlier, or start slightly later. But I think that if we get away from this notion of presenteeism in business, that you have to have bums on seats, and actually just start trusting people to do the work that they've been assigned to do it as well as they can. And people know themselves better than anyone else knows them. I know how I am going to best achieve something, and if I think that I'm going to be the best version of myself if I go for a walk and take the rest of today off and come back to it fresh tomorrow, then I would hope that my employer would have enough faith in me to let me do that.
And the great thing about doing a podcast like Move Your Head, and we discover that here at the podcast too, is that by having these conversations with someone else, it sometimes makes it easier to have those conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
But when it's a conversation that you're having face to face with someone, when it's something that you've got to sit down and do for the first time, not a friend or a relative, but a client, and here we're talking about work you said you were doing with, amongst others, clients like the organizations like the Law Society, what are some of the first questions that you have to deal with?
Well, often my first port of call, is somebody who's looking to introduce some kind of wellness practice for the organization, for their team. So the person that I'm talking to might be a kind of HR manager um, or someone in a leadership position. And in honesty, and these are business environments, that the main questions that I get are to do with what impact it's going to have on the organization and on the staff, because people do want to know, well, is this going to mean that staff take less time off sick? Is this going to mean that staff are more productive? Is it going to mean that staff satisfaction is higher? They're happier, that they want to stay working at the company for longer, that kind of stuff. And the answer to all of those things generally is yes. If employees are healthy and happy and they feel as though their employer really, really cares that they are, then yeah, you are going to have less people taking sick leave. You are going to have a more dedicated and productive staff force. Obviously, the people who actually are participating, the employees, they're much more interested in just the benefits that they're going to feel. So people, especially, I mean, yoga, the first question is just always, can I do it if I'm not flexible? I mean, that is just what everyone always asks. And the answer to that obviously is yes. It's about movement, and the degree of movement that you have available to you doesn't really matter very much. And the thing that comes up all the time with meditation is people's just saying they've tried it and they can't do it. They tried to meditate, but they've always got 100 thoughts in their head and they can never clear their mind, and then they get frustrated and they give up. And the best piece of advice that I give to those people, one of my favorite quotes that I use a lot, is that meditation is the spaces between your thoughts. So it might be that you sit down to meditate for 10 minutes, and 100 times you realize that you're thinking about something. You're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. You're thinking about that piece of work that you really have to finish. But if every single time you realize that you've become distracted, that you have a thought, you just draw yourself away from that thought. You come back to your breath, you come back to your body. Even if that lasts for a second before the next thought comes along, it's that choice to allow a thought to pass. That is what you're practicing. So I think that people need to be reassured that they're not doing it wrong.
I've heard it described by a Buddhist monk as being something like a chattering monkey when meditating, when concentrating on your own thoughts. You're not trying to drown out the world around us. You're not sitting in a temple trying to use your mantra, what's in your own head, to obliterate what's going on in the world around you, to drown it out. What you do is you acknowledge it, you notice it, and you fit it in around what else is going on in your head. It's like a chattering monkey. You don't try to drown it out with your meditation. You notice it, and you say to yourself, there's a chattering monkey, and then you move on.
Exactly.
So let's leave that chattering monkey to one side and look ahead. Let's look down the line and try to put our finger on something that we think is around the corner. What disruption, what big change do you see coming up when it comes to mental health in the 9-to-5 context? What's coming up next? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, honestly, I think, as I've touched on already, more and more people are going to be speaking candidly about their own mental health problems at work. And I think that organizations and people in a leadership position need to be prepared for that. that's not to say that I think that everyone should suddenly go out and do, counseling qualifications, because it's not, that it's not necessarily appropriate to take on any sense of responsibility over an employee's mental health. But there are some things that, it's going to be really important for organizations and for individuals and organizations to get better at. So one of the things that I always talk about, when I get asked this question sometimes, by where places I work, what if someone just comes and tells me that they're actually really depressed? I wouldn't know what to say. The main piece of advice that I give is, that active listening is the best that you can offer another person. You, as a manager, you don't have to be an expert in psychology. You don't even really have to understand or relate in any way to what a person's describing. But active listening, so really giving someone your complete attention, listening to what they have to say, acknowledging it, believing them, that's 95% of the skills required. I think that kind of human, that empathy, that allowing a person to feel comfortable to be honest with you in that way, that those are skills that some people will probably need to improve. But they can be. It's not active listening is a skill that can be practiced and can be improved quite easily. And then I suppose after that point, it becomes more of an issue, a kind of broader issue of the policies within your organization. So your policies need to reflect your attitude to staff well-being. It's all well and good encouraging staff to be honest with you about their mental health, but then if there are no policies in place for what actually happens if a person comes and tells you that they're having, they're really struggling this week or this month, then a person isn't going to want to come and tell you that, or they're going to feel like there's no point. So I think in the first instance, the kind of people skills involved are probably some people should have a think about, and they might feel like they could they have some room for improvement, some new skills to learn. And then I think HR teams need to work closely with their own staff, and think about the best ways that they can draft policies that are going to make sure that the organization is putting its money where its mouth is, as it were.
So some great takeaways there, the importance of active listening and making sure that we pay attention to things and use that as the basis of honest, safe conversations. And all of those, of course, will be topics and subjects which I suppose you could tell people more about. And if they do want to find out more, perhaps about mental health, about wellness in the workplace, perhaps about yoga, or to listen to your podcast, where would you suggest they go for that?
Well, for all the yoga and working in corporate environments and coming in and doing classes and things, I would recommend my website, which is, if you just Google Lauren Gasser Yoga, you'll find that. And the podcast, Move Your Head, that's available on SoundCloud and TuneIn and Stitcher and YouTube. If you're somebody who has experienced mental health issues and is looking for A, just to hear other people's stories and feel like you're less alone, and B, looking for some kind of practical ways that you might be able to make changes, just small changes to your day-to-day life, then I would recommend the podcast.
And that takes us almost right to the end of our conversation today, but there's just time to ask you one more question. If you were to give just one piece of advice, say just one thing, to a professional who is trying to understand how to move beyond the disruption point, how to understand the importance of workplace well-being, of mental health, and how to accommodate this to do something new and different, what would be the one thing you would say to a finance professional that needs to take this topic to help them go beyond disruption?
I think that my main take-home message to anyone in a professional capacity is to stop equating any kind of mental health issue with failure or with weakness or with ineffectiveness. we are all humans. We all experience mental illness at some time in our lives. And it absolutely is not a reflection on how intelligent you are or how capable you are. In fact, the cleverest and most creative and accomplished people in the world are often the ones that have the most unstable mental health, because you're expecting an awful lot of your brain all day, every day. So I think that we need to really let go of this this kind of toxic sense of having to seem on top of things all the time, because that isn't really what matters. Well, what matters is that you are the best version of yourself that you can be, and that you're producing your best work. And if in order to do that, it means that you have to take care of yourself, and taking care of yourself means being honest with the people around you, then that is going to benefit you and your organization a hell of a lot more than just pretending that everything's okay.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Lauren Gasser. There is so much more to explore around this topic of workplace well-being and mental health, and we'll make sure the show notes include links to all of the resources that Lauren's just mentioned. There are two other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further. If you're a member already, if you're listening to this podcast, you might have come to us via the AICPA website or CGMA store, then I would say you can, depending on where you are in the world, already look at those bookmarks to find more resources about this topic. You can go to aicpastore.com/go-beyond-disruption or cgmastore.com/go-beyond-disruption. You'll find courses, webinars, and more professional development resources there, which are consistently updated to keep you ahead of the curve. For exclusive insights and perspectives every week, get our latest podcasts, and you can get that wherever you already get your podcasts or where you stream your music. So it could be on Stitcher, could be on Spotify. We may be on Pandora already, but we're definitely on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, as well as TuneIn. Free, automatic, get every Wednesday's episode straight to your mobile device. Just tap the subscribe or follow buttons on your phone, and you can also just search for Go Beyond Disruption podcast anywhere online. We hope you got something useful from this episode, and if you did, go ahead and share it with someone in your network who'd enjoy it too. From the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more insights that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered, and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA or AICPA.org. It is provided with the understanding that the AICPA and AICPA.org are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional service. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA and AICPA.org make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material. Such material. Such material. Such material. Such material.